It is Mojo Monday, Rick Hale. How are you?
I'm awesome. Thank you, Brett. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. We took a couple weeks off. You went traveling the country, and so now we're getting back into our groove of Mojo Mondays, and I'm excited. We did a session on Scott Galloway's book, The Algebra of Happiness, a few weeks ago, and we're diving back into that book today. And I guess the title of today's topic is, what are you willing to do? Why don't you set us up a little bit?
Well, the idea is that the algebra of happiness, the first thought that pops into my head is that it's a moving target. The things that you think will make you happy at 12, 14, 15 years old, and then at 21, 22, 25, and then 35, 40, like it's just a moving target. And to accept that what it is that made you happy yesterday will make you happy tomorrow there's a huge fallacy and potential error in that line of thinking. And small things are big things. So part of it is it's just hyper awareness and being clear on who you are, what you are, and why you are. And again, at different phases of life, it evolves. And I know one of the things we're going to touch on is, how do you navigate new awareness around opportunity, and then how do you know when you're stuck? And
Yeah.
I think the devil's sometimes in the detail and the small things. To your point, I went on a 3-week trip, which I've never done, and highly recommend biting off something big like that someday. And it was part of my wife and we had a bucket list trip, and we went to Norway and Iceland, London, Prague, Istanbul, and Vienna. Those were the big stops. And we went to Norway, but I'm laughing because this was one of the cups I got. And I'm like, we went to Orway. Like, so in this discussion, I'm like, golly, there's such a big, heavy topic. And I'm like, it's really just one letter at a time. But without it, you're not going to the same place. I'm going to Orway now instead of Norway. So where in life are you missing a letter, man? Maybe that's the setup.
There you go.
Just
Uh,
one letter. No regrets.
we might have talked about that on here before.
We have, but that's all right.
All right.
Learning's later.
So let's set this up a little bit. The insinuation is, do you believe there's a gap between where you're at and where you want to be around the word happiness? Is it a personal a gap around happiness? Is there a professional gap around happiness? Rick, we're really good at asking people, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you at on your happiness scale around professionally, or where are you at on your happiness scale around personally? And as you're pointed out already, you're going to answer that differently at different seasons of your life. And the author kind of pokes fun at, like, yeah, when you're in your early 20s, you're all about having this great physique because you want to attract a great physique. And later in your journey of life, you're not as defined. Your happiness is not as defined by that in your 50s like it was in your 20s, right? So you go through different seasons. But I guess the question that we wanted to pose today on Mojo was, what are you willing to do? Like, if I'm stuck in a groove or a rut, or however you want to say it, around my number in my rating of what I would give myself on a happiness scale, what am I willing to do? And how do I get out of that?
Well, you said it, or you just said it. I think first is self-assessment. You can't figure out, GPS in your car is just human behavior, and human experience is just like GPS. If it doesn't know your current coordinates and where you are, and you can't plug in, and you inability to plug in where you're going, that guidance system is a fail, and it'll never work. And I think the human journey either becomes one of intentionality or just random and organic. And organic always sounds fun, but I've also learned that structure is freedom, and having some vision, or, I don't know if you saw the Schwarzenegger documentary, but it was phenomenal. And what I took away was that he kept repeating the word visions, my visions, my visions, my visions. And this guy grew up with nothing in a small Austrian village, and ended up the governor of California. How is that even possible? And I'll tell you how it was possible. He had an insatiable desire to maximize life and to squeeze everything he could out of it with massive amounts of commitment. But he had a vision. He knew
Yeah.
exactly where he was going so that he didn't have too many days where he wandered off course. And so to be able to have that level of vision, and I think he was also honest with where he was in his capacities and what he had to improve and make better so that he could evolve. I mean, his obviously even just the way he communicated, still challenging to, by some standard as an American, but it was really challenging early on when he didn't have command of the English language, but he had vision. So, but until you know where you are and where you go, where you want to go, how do you connect the dots to create a absolute non-negotiable vision?
Yeah. And I think society plays a role in putting pressure on us. I think about like when I would go to class in college and I'd see that student in the same class as me that was 10 years older. And what was the pressure they felt of being the old guy in the room? Or better yet, what if somebody went back to school in their 60s? Like, are they willing to deal with the society pressure of, or do they care, right? Or let's say we talked about if you lived in a $1 million house, are you willing to sell the house and downsize to move your life forward to a place of happiness? And where does that society pressure come into you? Or you have the cool car. Are you willing to sell the cool car to get a practical car to move your life forward, right? Like we deal with these society pressures that play a factor in how we approach whether or not we're stuck or not, right?
100%. And as you get older, I find in myself, and I think it's common, that you're more concerned with what's inside than what's outside.
Yeah.
And you're less influenced by that. And it's funny that you brought up school. I remember this 75-year-old woman in my, one of my classes. I think it was statistics. And I thought, oh, that's so cute. It wasn't cute when she blew up the bell curve and none of us, she's the only one with a 99 and the entire class averaged a 60. So, but I can tell you the difference was she wasn't distracted by outside influences like going out late nights and having fun with your friends. And she took it, she treated that like a job, and that was her job. And, to her credit, she crushed it. And also my hopes of getting elevated to a B from a C organically because of the curve. But so its approach and perspective is really what you need to take a deep breath and analyze. And the 1 to 10 thing you mentioned earlier, like personally and professionally, you could certainly break it down to as many categories as you want. But until you're clear where you are, you can't connect the dots to where you want to go.
Yeah. One of the things the author talks about in the book is a little bit around this formula of happiness money equals your degree or your education plus your zip code. And I thought that was really interesting because your zip code plays a factor in your economic opportunities. And one of the things he made mention of, which I think is an interesting talking point, is he said 2/3 of the economic growth of the next 50 years is actually going to happen in super cities. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, that's where opportunity lives. I mean, if you grew up in Mayberry, from this small little town, there's just only so much opportunity economically. There are only so many jobs. There's only so many people that you could either sell your product or service to. And so the idea is that the first half of the equation is your skill set and your capacity to deliver something of value that people want, that they'd pay for. And so, that part of the equation, I'd say take a deep breath and analyze, am I really best in class? And do I bring a competitive advantage to the table that's undeniable? And then the second half of it, is there an audience big enough to fill my bucket and create enough volume, if you will, in the process of exhibiting my core genius or skill set? Yeah. And so you combine those two. And he said, I can predict the level of success you'll have in life just simply by your skills and your what are you good at, coupled with the environment, which is your zip code. Yeah. And so where you live is really important.
Absolutely. And I was laughing, thinking like, okay, if I lived in rural America, I may need to move to a bigger city to change my trajectory economically. Or if I'm trying to be strategic or smart, maybe I'm looking for a place that's about to boom. Like if I found
Yeah.
myself in Detroit, Michigan before the auto industry took off, that would have been amazing, right? Because you would have ridden that economic growth and that economic stability. But at the same time, Detroit, Michigan rode it down too because of the auto industry. So, you got to be strategic in this conversation too.
Yeah, and socioeconomic, overlays matter. If you're gonna, I have relatives that live in the Villages down in Florida, which is a retirement community. Are you going to go down there and sell surfboards? For two reasons you wouldn't. One is not coastal, and two, they're probably not doing any active surfing in the ocean.
Yeah.
So you got to recognize where's my tribe, where's my who thinks and acts and behaves in a way that I can serve in a way that becomes an undeniably valuable. So
Yeah.
it's a little more complicated than just zip code, but I think what he's really alluded to is the bigger the zip code, the odds are that your tribe's buried inside of it. And I
Yeah.
even remember when the market shifted in 2008, 9, 10, and we went through a downturn, I'm like, if the pond you're fishing isn't producing fish, pick up your rowboat and drag the damn thing to a different pond. If it's South Atlanta, North Atlanta, East or West is not as prosperous in the current season, there may be even temporary changes in your thinking about who you're trying to fish for. Target fishing works way better than just blanket fishing.
Yeah. So I think a lot of our conversation's been around the professional side, but talk to me about the personal side. What if I'm in a rut? Like I had a conversation with a lady that works for us, and she's single, and she said, the pool of potential suitors is just not in Atlanta. And of course, I don't 100% agree with that, but if they're in a rut personally, like how do you get out of a personal rut or a
I
groove?
mean, so it's been said before that we're the average of the 3 to 5 people we spend the most time with. So I would say, are you around lifters or leaners and people that either add value and boost and then, or are they just bringing you down with their small town thinking or small, personal thinking? So half of it's your environment. So I think people often repeat things that are said in their intimate environments. And so I think maybe the line of thinking needs to be reframed, number one. Number two is recognize what is your core genius and skill set relative to any endeavor, and how do you find a role model, a coach, or top grade, your own self-image so that you approach things more positively and optimistically. And so those are generic statements in kind of world, top down. But at the end of the day, I think step one is to decide. And I do believe that the universe, there's this thing called the inverse paranoid theory that Jack Canfield in his book, Success Principles, brought up that, instead of Murphy's Law, everything's going to go wrong. Why not flip the script on that and decide for yourself that the universe is favoring you and that it's to your betterment? And so it sounds like a bad attitude rarely leads to a great outcome. And so there's got to be a reframing on the front end, and then actual behavior and a change, and a step one that helps reframe your subconscious brain's opinion of yourself.
There you go. One thing that I wrote down out of the book is he said interest and hobbies add texture to your personality. So sometimes I think we get busy being busy, and we don't actually realize there's some happiness that comes from extracurricular things, whether it's a workout, CrossFit, or mountain biking, or art, being artistic, or whatever those interests and hobbies are that you need to add texture to your personality. Maybe you go engage those or re-engage those that you haven't been engaging for a period of time in your life, right? All right, Rick,
Yeah.
here's how I want to kind of put an exclamation point on this is I want to pose the question, what are you most afraid of? And if I pose the question, what are you most afraid of? I really want to kind of give it the context of, hey, I have this 1 to 10 gap around my happiness, whether personally or professionally, but recognize the fact that there's some fear attached to that. And if I pose the question, what are you most afraid of? Where would you take us?
So I think the slowest form of death is complacency and comfort. I also believe that we've had a 10-year run where most people are feeling pretty good about themselves, even in light of the shift in the market. And everyone's kind of convinced themselves that this is going to, rebound in a short enough time frame that it's not going to really have substantive impact. And it's to be determined. But for me, I'm most afraid of comfort and complacency killing the potential I have to become a better human being. And that, it's a slow death because you're kind of lulled into this belief that this is cool. And my advice today is, so what, now what? If you wake up with that attitude every day and then open the lens of potential, I think back to the inverse paranoid theory that the universe wants to favor you, but you've got to pose a question. You have to ask for it. You have to say, what if what in me has to change that if it did changes everything? So that the who I am, what I am, and why I am becomes clearer, because, if you're not growing, you're theoretically dying. And so I think the bigger question is, what's debilitating, what's holding you back, and how do you eliminate that from the conversation that frees you up to see the potential in that next step? And then it's taking that next step.
I love it. I heard in a church service over the weekend, a guy named Hal Donaldson of Convoy Hope, he said, you don't create momentum, you invite it. And it took me a while to really kind of get my head wrapped around this quote, but I think sometimes in our life, we try to artificially create momentum of change. And instead of just being the change and inviting the momentum into our lives to where we make a change internally and allow that momentum to happen to us, we try to artificially create it and try to do something that's just not in alignment with naturally who we are. And we expect the momentum to happen and it doesn't happen. And then we get discouraged, right? So, and then it kind of perpetuates this fear of not being able to make the change. So sometimes you just have to invite it by doing something that's super in alignment with who you are as a person and allowing that momentum to happen.
Yeah. And be aware of blind spots. And that's almost paradoxical, because blind spots in theory, aren't, awareness lacks. And so I think in the same breath that you said false momentum, be conscious of the reality that you may not see the whole picture today. And that if you take enough time and create margin to explore your potential, or at least assess where you feel like, if I died tomorrow, I would be fill in the blank, 10 out of 10 happy and content with the things that I did well in my effort. And sometimes that requires an honest advocate for you and a steward of truth. And so don't be afraid to lean into your inner circle and people and trust for that care and candor, just to illuminate opportunities. So you may not even know what you don't know. So be open to that idea, take a deep breath, and then create enough space to allow it to enter your body and your mind. And then from there, trigger, that first step or next step.
Yep. Rick, you know what it is? It is Mojo Monday, sir.
Monday.
Thank you. See you soon.
See you, buddy. Hope you guys have an amazing week.